Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host FAIZA with a prayer. May Allah keep you all safe, healthy and blessed. And may Allah fill this world with peace and justice, inshallah. Ameen. And may Allah hasten the appearance of Imam of our time, inshallah. Ameen. Today the topic we are about to discuss is related to the obviously is Israel versus Iran, Lebanon, Gaza. The situation is deteriorating, and it's really painful to see when Israel couldn't achieve any result on military basis. He couldn't achieve any of his goal, whereas he is just bombing, carpet bombing, and just burning the people alive at the moment. And we can see that in the recent attack in Gaza, there were 4 people or little more maybe in the camps who were burned alive, and everyone had seen that. So all we are watching is genocide. All we are watching is ethnic cleansing, because they are just killing and taking the lives of innocent people. We can't forget the 5 years old even Hind Rajab, who was killed last year in the start of this year in January in the car when she was waiting for her help to come, and the people who come to help for rescue, they were also killed in that during that process. So we can see what is just out of control, and and it is reflecting a lost war. He is not winning anything at all. He's just taking the life of innocent people, and it is just displacing them, and it is just bombing their house, and it is just ethnic cleanse, just to control over the land and the places around that region. So who can stop this, and what US policy is on this situation? Because at the moment Israel is out of control. Even in today's attack, 61 people were killed on Gaza Strip, and up till now more than 42,289 people are martyred in Gaza, and for 98,684, even more than that, people are injured, who are burned in, and many of them are children. So what is going on in this world at the moment is really chaotic and very painful situation. So we will move on to our guests, and we'll discuss the situation with them and see what sort of perspective they have on this situation. Assalamu alaikum and hello. We have Clive Menzies, and we do have Sister Arzu Mir Ali. I'm really honored to have you both on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. Mr. Clive, first of all, I would like you to reflect on that. Israel is burning children alive. Before it is it was happening as they were bombing, and the families were buried alive. And it's just that we are just seeing humanitarian crisis at the moment. So how do you see? Don't you think it's legally and around the globe, they don't have any moral standing, ethical standing, and the legal standing, if you see? So what are your thoughts on the current situation going on in Gaza, Lebanon, and the kind of battles he is in?
Is that addressed to me? Sorry, Faisal.
Yeah. Clive, I've asked you, yeah.
Sorry. Well, yes, it is very distressing and horrific what we're witnessing, but one needs to look at what is happening or what led up to this, which is because there is a global context, and I think we need to differentiate between those in power who are effectively operating as the structure dictates, and the rest of us who one way or another are victims of this system. And the problem is that expecting any sort of resolution from the power politics is to put our trust in the wrong people, because this is how we've got here. And that is not to criticize Lebanon, Iran, and the people of Gaza, Palestinians, from defending themselves and, if you like, striking back against the atrocities that have been committed against them. But as long as we're in this dynamic, there's not a lot of hope for humanity, because violence begets more violence. And so what we need to come to understand is that whether we're Israelis, Iranians, Lebanese, English, American, we the people, the vast majority of the souls on this earth, basically don't want any of this. It faith in the power structures that are clearly acting against our interests. And this is, I mean, I know you want to talk about the atrocities and the genocide, but these are symptomatic of a system that is now in its death throes. And what Israel is doing is self-destructive. One cannot see how they can succeed. If they draw America and Britain and every other Western country into the mess, then all that does is create more violence. We need to recognize that the way forward is not to put our faith in the power structures that have got us here. And that is equally applies to the victim countries as well as the perpetrators, because we've come to accept that we should be ruled over beings. We have enough of a challenge controlling ourselves, ruling ourselves, our passions, our weaknesses, and what have you. How could we ever expect that the worst in our society, because they are the worst, because they've compromised their humanity, to get into power? Why would we abdicate responsibility for ourselves to these despicable people? And that's not to say that there aren't people who try to be virtuous within this power structure, but they're defeated at the outset. And those leaders who've been assassinated over the years are those that have stood against this power system. So clearly it is the structure that we need to focus on, rather than spend a lot of time agonizing over the consequences. I've been agonizing over the consequences of what's been the last dozen years or more, because it's just got worse and worse and worse. But that doesn't get us any further forward. What one needs to recognize, that if you peel back the layers of lies, if you like, lies and deception and misdirection, then one finds that what is at root of this is the power structure, which is primarily driven by money. And that's a different topic altogether, which we could get into on another occasion. But it is the structure that is creating this chaos. And I would say that the Israeli government, which is, like most governments, not at all representative of the interests of Israelis, is on a path to self-destruction. So I think I'll leave it there, because I'm sure your other guests can give you a more detailed analysis of what's going on in the ground. But at the end of the day, we said in 2019, after they played out the climate scam, the terrorism scam, the induced mass migration, the wars, and then they brought on the COVID, which we anticipated. We also alluded to the fact that when economic collapse comes, the war card is a card that's invariably relied upon, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Thank you so much, Clive. We do have Sister Batul with us as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sister Batul. First of all, I'll move on to Sister Arzu, because she was listening to Clive as well. So I'll come back to you. Sister Arzu, what are your thoughts on what Mr. Clive has said? Obviously, there is so much pain, agony, and miserable, vulnerable situation going on around the globe at the moment, especially in Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, and Syria. There are so many people who are being being affected in many ways, is the one thing. And as Clive has mentioned, that we really need to focus on the structure of this power. And what do you think this, as he mentioned, is all based on money? And obviously money is another topic we need to discuss further. But how we can hit this power structure, I mean, in order to come out of these imperialist, colonialist ideologies, and how strongly they are like capturing the world and economics and politics and the people and the region. So what are your thoughts on the this fact?
Mashallah, it's a big question, and Clive raised some very interesting points, some of which I agree with wholeheartedly, some of which not so much. But let's focus on the things that I think we are all agreed on, and that's that the power structure, as Clive said, that we kind of are living in on a global scale is not fit for purpose, and intentionally so. It is deeply corrupt. It has, it's the result of, let's just go back to the end of the Second World War. Let's say it's a result of that, etc., and that we are stuck with it at the moment. And as I think we all know, the governments that so-called supposedly represent us do not represent us, right? So what can we do as, it seems in this scenario, people without agency? Okay, if we cannot really make a significant change on who is representing us through the ballot box, then what is left for us? And I think one of the most important things that we can do, and we have been doing, and it has been happening, particularly in this last year at an accelerated pace, is to decolonize our minds. Okay, we have been in thrall and in awe of the idea of the system as is, and that somehow we can change it through working within it, somehow modifying it, somehow making it reflect us. Okay, and in that kind of discourse, the fact that it doesn't reflect us becomes something that we are to blame for, okay? And this, I've heard it many times. I've heard it when it comes to the national elections in the United Kingdom, in the US, incredibly, people are still talking about how they can turn that system into a fair and just system without stopping to think that the system is the way it is because that's the way it was meant to be, okay? And if we had, better, if we are going to have a black president or possibly a woman president, or in this country we've had now women prime ministers and prime ministers of colour, and the top ministers of state who are ministers of colour, that somehow this is a reflection of the what's the word I'm looking for, egalitarianness, or somehow malleableness and altogether betterness, for want of a better phrase, the systems that we're looking at. This is not the case. This is the case of systems just trying to kind of put on a facade that will fool a lot of us, right? And it has worked to a large extent. This last year, and I think this is where I disagree with a lot of people who, and I understand why people are despondent. I'm highly depressed every day. I think we all are at some time or another either crying or wanting to cry when we see the news of what's happening right now. We're having a genocide live streamed in front of our eyes, and only yesterday and the day before we have seen people being burnt alive. I couldn't imagine this really, even a year ago, that this level of atrocity would be kind of not just happening, but happening so openly. And at the same time, the powers that be and the institutions and structures, including the mainstream media, are not batting an eyelid. On the contrary, they are many times cheerleading this, right? So I slightly lost the train of my thought here, but what I am trying to say is that I think a lot of people now, the majority of people, are not fooled by this, and the kind of key constituencies that we had, which were either in awe or in fear of these institutions, are now also beginning to see the light. Okay, so we have to keep this up. We have to decolonize our minds, and part of that is also looking for alternatives. Okay, we need to be having those discussions, and many of them have been had, and we have had examples in practice of revolutionary movements, whether we're talking about the Islamic revolution, whether we're talking about the Zapatistas, whether we're talking about Cuba or any other of the examples, successful and unsuccessful, of the last few hundred years. We need to look at those. We need to look at also what we could glean from older examples of governance and how those worked maybe better than what we have now. And have those conversations and start kind of political movements that are aspiring for some of these things. And I think it's important that we recognize that there's going to be a lot of disagreement about what the future, a better transformed, more just world will look like, and the reasons why we're coming to these arguments and these conclusions. But this is not a weakness, okay? We do not have to have a one-size-fits-all, and we do not have to have all the answers. What is key is that we have to be looking for them completely outside of the paradigms that we have been living in till this moment, because we can see now that they are not only not fit for purpose, they are in and of themselves racist and genocidal. So I think that I will leave it there. I'm sure Batul has things to say as well.
Sister Batul, what are your thoughts on what Clive and Sister Arzu explained very well? Like, first of all, we really need to decolonize our mind and then come out of fear, as we discussed that last week as well. And then obviously we should focus on the right things and like break the structure and should see what we can do at the moment. When we look at the international law, it is farce. When we look at United Nations and all these big forums which apparently are made to protect the human rights and legal rights and protect the people of the world globally, like then we see them as failed institution. They can't, and we have seen recently like what Israel has done. It's not just only hitting the people, killing the people of Gaza or Lebanon or people places around that. It is also like hurting the United Nations peacemakers who were there and who were trying to see and analyze what is going on. So they are not even leaving them as well. So how do you see the situation, where it is going, what Israel is trying to achieve out of a lost war? So what are your thoughts on the current situation? What would you like to share with us? Sister Batul, I can't hear you. Can you hear? Now it's fine.
Can you hear me now? Is it fine?
Yeah.
Yes. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes. I echo what Sister Arzu has just said, that absolutely the system ultimately relies on our hopelessness and our inability to imagine an alternative. There's that very famous saying in Arabic which goes as follows: Kama takunu yuwalla alaykum, as you are is ruled over you. So those who rule over us is a reflection of the state of the people themselves. So, and of course that won't come without a price either, in either way, if you choose to be ruled by evil or if you choose to be ruled by a just system. So Sister Arzu mentioned, for example, the Islamic Revolution of Iran. The people of Iran chose to unanimously, collectively rise up in the face of the tyrannical Shah. As a result of this revolution, of course, we know without this revolution, we wouldn't be seeing the liberations on the ground today, because ultimately it was this revolution that breathed that life and that spirit of independence, not just in the region, but beyond, in terms of the decolonial struggles and allying with those anti-imperialist powers, those powers that are anti-imperialism, that are fighting the same common enemy, which is America. Ultimately, it's the Islamic Republic that's been driving America crazy for these past 4 decades. So we know that on the ground, this reality and the power balance is shifting as a result of the efforts of the resistance movements. But we also know that the people themselves are paying a heavy price in the face of that. So if you truly want to be free and not ruled by the arrogant powers, something has to give. There has to be that physical discomfort and that physical suffering. That's obvious. That's the obvious outcome, because you are dealing with such a ferocious entity. As you described it, capitalism has 0 red lines. Capitalism is all about maximizing profit, in actual fact, irrespective of what that consequence will be. And so, for example, if you look at the state of the Arab populations in the surrounding regions, particularly in those areas of the Gulf, if they don't care about the fact that they're ruled over by tyrannical dictatorial systems that are so in bed with the West, and in fact are only kind of consolidated in their power because of the West, why should we be surprised that they're not wreaking havoc about Palestine or crashing into the American embassies, for example? So the state of affairs is really a reflection of the state of the people. And if we talk about the importance of decolonizing the mind, it's enough for one to look at how the capitalist machine, the fourth leg of the capitalist system, is ultimately the media, or rather you could call it the first leg. It comes before the judicial and the executive and the legislative branches, because the media is designed to consolidate all of these and to put a pretty face on a very ugly reality. If you look at the billions of dollars that are spent on lobbying, that I absolutely agree with what Arza mentioned about this, notion being completely shattered because people could see the reality of what's happening on the ground. So all those billions of dollars that were spent on lobbying in the media have effectively gone to waste, because the people, for the first time, really, there's a turning point in terms of how hearts and minds are shifting and the way that people are seeing the truth on the ground. If you see the way that they go, the extent that they go to control the narrative, the level of censorship against the truth, if speaking the truth wasn't so powerful, we wouldn't see this reality. We wouldn't see that in the same vein that they seek to completely plunge the global south in poverty. They seek to numb, the global north through the entertainment industries, through Hollywood, through hedonism, through getting people to be so concerned and insecure, and stuck with all these kinds of mental illnesses as a way to distract them from the reality of what they're doing at the top. But ultimately, how does that system come to a change? How do those global hegemonic superpowers ultimately get replaced and removed from their positions and structures of power? It happens through direct confrontation on the ground. I mean, you spoke about, for example, the UN institution. We know that an entity like the UN was born out of the need for the West to consolidate its hegemony globally, and to give it a pretext through this institution that ultimately was born out of World War II, and that was consolidated by the victors of the war. And we know that the Israeli occupation entity was born out of the UN. Even if we look at the resolutions that that the UN over time has put on the shelf, this idea that Palestinians have the right to return, or this idea that the annexation of the West Bank is illegal, or the besiegement of Gaza is illegal, 101 different resolutions that we see. The moment America actually takes a step back and says, we might have to consider enacting these resolutions, is when it feels like the Israeli occupation entity is weak. In order to save it, when that power balance is shifting on the ground, that's when the idea of a two-state solution becomes, if you like, the lesser of two evils compared to the complete dismantling of the entity. Is their idea of giving Palestinians crumbs. We'll give you Gaza and we'll give you the West Bank, and whilst they're at it, it's not even an independent Palestinian state. Putting Western-friendly entities in those regions, like Gaza, for example. So nothing can change that status quo on a global level, except that direct confrontation on the ground. And we need to expect that will come with a price to pay because of the nature of the ferocious entity. Now, I think for globally, one of the issues is that we've never seen ourselves as extensions of what's happening on the ground. We've never seen ourselves as extensions of the resistance, because we have a very effective part to play, being in the belly of the beast. And we don't want to underestimate the importance of the information war, because the moment people are aware of what's actually happening, and people are mobilized in this kind of way, like they have a burning fire in their hearts, that's how you expect change to happen within every respective, if you like, cluster bubble. Like every person who's employed, for example, in a company, those who are teachers, those who are university students, if each person thought about calling for the divestment from the occupation entity, because we know that the tentacles of the Israeli lobby is everywhere, essentially. They've infiltrated everywhere, and that's part of how they've consolidated themselves. So if each person thinks in that kind of way, then that's it. Like you will see the system in front of you crumble. But the problem is, it's the fear that overtakes the people, because of ultimately the mechanisms of suppression that have been put by the state. So there's that element of fear, and there's also that element of ignorance. So those are two areas that I think, as active and aware people, should think of working on the basis of. You mentioned also very quickly in terms of how the Israeli occupation entities, like attacking UN troops, UNIFIL, UNRWA, the rest of it. Look, the Israeli occupation entity is very arrogant. it relies on the evil American support, which is completely unconditional. I was reading about how actually Axios leaked that the idea of escalating in Lebanon was actually America's idea. You know, this notion that the Israeli occupation entity has managed to achieve nothing on the ground in Gaza except killing civilians en masse. And so they want to kind of restore that lost deterrence from October the 7th. So the idea is, you know, if we can deal decisive blows to the more stronger, more coherent Islamic resistance of Lebanon, then we could basically have this idea of a facade victory, and we'll be able to restore that deterrence somehow. And then on that basis, it's almost like an ultimatum also. The way that I've seen the American strategy change from calling for a ceasefire, because we know that for, you know, months and months, America's been calling for a ceasefire, and it's not that it didn't want a ceasefire. I'm of the belief that the American strategy was genuinely a ceasefire, because when America sees that a strategy is not working on the ground, it wants to shift it. America wants results, you know, and we know that in terms of the Israeli occupation entity itself, it's not a monolith. You had Lapid, you had Benny Gantz, you had even the likes of Gallant, who not long ago was calling for a ceasefire. Like, this isn't calling for a ceasefire. Why? Not because they don't want to kill civilians. I mean, they're totally genocidal maniacs, and every Palestinian is an enemy of the Israeli occupation entity, but because they've not managed to achieve a single strategic military objective on the ground, and as per the top military analysts, their assessment was, if this war continues for 2 years, the entity will cease to exist, because it's being stripped of the components that give it the ability to survive as a stable entity. If you look on the level of the morale of the settlers, of the military itself, if you look at the economy, for example, there's just no stability within the entity. It's become effectively a pariah globally. That consolidation of defeat is only happening with more and more and more time. So actually, the continuation of war, in many respects, is actually helping the resistance in its mission of dismantling this genocidal, apartheid, settler colonial entity as a structure. Like, it's helping it achieve this objective, but it's coming at the huge hefty price of civilian killings, which is obviously why it's the priority of the resistance to end this war. But America's shift towards escalatory means and measures with regards to striking the Islamic resistance of Lebanon was actually, in their assessment, the smart tactic of shifting to an arena where they felt like they could deal more blows. And for a good 2 or 3 weeks since mid-September, you know, in many respects, this was kind of going in their favor. You know, this idea of, you know, the tactical wins, I'll call it the tactical wins, because it was never strategic wins. This idea of assassinating leaders of the resistance, we know historically in terms of the resistance, has not made it weaker. It's only made it stronger. It's only filled its fighters and its population with more zeal and morale and more ability to sacrifice. And we know that the resistance has gained strong leadership, command and control. And that showed itself before yesterday with that attack on the Golani brigades in the region deep within the entity. So it's regained that command and control. But ultimately, that shift is a reflection of its sheer and utter failure. And America right now is in a position where it's telling the Israeli occupation entity, okay, this is a make or break moment for you. Either you win and you triumph over the resistance axis, and if you do that, then it's open hand for you. You know, you can seize Lebanon, and then once you've seized Lebanon, we'll go into Iraq, we'll defeat the resistance there, we'll go into Yemen, even to Iran will cause regime change. You know, this is the level of drunken high that Netanyahu has been experiencing, this idea of the new Middle East that he's been pitching forward, you know, this plan that America had for the past 2.5 decades on the war of terror that it didn't manage to materialize. They're giving it to Israel, and they're like, okay, let's see what you're made of. And obviously, we know Israel will be defeated, and these plans will not materialize. And if that, and that's the case, and we know that to be the final outcome. And when that's the final outcome, then the Israeli occupation entity, as we know, has become a redundant, failing entity for America. Politics runs on power and ability. It's important that Israel doesn't fall at the hands of the resistance, and that deterrence doesn't collapse at the hands of the resistance, but ultimately America goes where its interests are. And 7.5 decades on, you expect policies to change. Politics runs on power and ability. Politics is not a charity, you know. So America itself will look to find substitutes to replace the failing and dying entity of the Israeli occupation entity, and will shrink it to match the true size of what it's capable of achieving on the ground. So if you haven't defeated the Gazan resistance, for example, do not expect yourself to be able to maintain yourself or to maintain a kind of security belt across the Philadelphia corridor. That's impossible. Until you can defeat the resistance, will you be able to do that? So we know that the entity, by the end of this, and no war goes on forever, will shrink to match its true size. But we have to understand that the kind of impunity that Israel enjoys is all due to one thing. America's support is unconditional, especially during time of war, where it's an emergency situation. So even if America is acting contrary to Israeli interests, and we've seen this for the past several months in the start of this war, America will still walk with Israel, will still walk with their strategy, because the most important thing is to not weaken their project. When we think of Israel, it's not a foreign separate entity. It is the American strategy for the region. It is the American project. They are the ones that are in the driver's seat ultimately. That is the root cause of the issue over here. It's the American hegemony that represents itself in this transnational capitalist class that we see globally, of which Israel is just a small tentacle.
Thank you, Sister Batul. Clive, what are your thoughts what Sister Arzu and Sister Batul has said? And some of the points she has both have mentioned are really important. We are obviously trying to discuss act by the Israel, which is self-destruction, which is related to self-destruction, and it is not just destructing itself, but also it can be destructive for America as well, because when you are in such a war where they just can have like tactical wins, they can just assassinate some leaders through target killing, but on the ground they are unable to achieve anything except committing a genocide or ethnic cleansing and all that. So how do you see this fact that this is not everything Israel is doing? It's not just going towards the destruction of itself, but also the United States as well. So what are your thoughts on this thing?
I think on the basis of our research, I'll try and give you what we've discovered is the power structure globally. Mm-hmm. And irrespective of secret societies, bloodlines, secret organizations, all the rest of it, essentially money rules. And there are the banking families headed up by the Rothschilds who basically are at the top of the pyramid. They may be well accountable, they may be fronts for darker forces. We won't go there. Israel was given to the Rothschilds for getting America into the war. And contrary to what Badul has said, America is run by Israel, not the other way around. Israel effectively is excess of money power. It is a private fiefdom. It may be run by the current Khazarian mafia, but it is accountable ultimately to the money power. And we can't disassociate this from what's happening in Ukraine. And what we've got at the moment is a geopolitical two-step going on, which is when it was similar in the run-up to the First World War, the Second World War. All these wars have been fabricated in the same way, that they are created and manipulated. So you have the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and they've been joined by 500 other countries, including Saudi Arabia and Dubai. So this is, if you like, the same game, but with a slightly different complexion. So when, as you said, something like decolonize our minds, I was wholeheartedly in agreement with that. But this system is beyond redemption. It is collapsing, and that is why we're seeing so much violence. What we need to think about is actually what is it that drives us? How do say money has created the fear of not having enough, the fear that you won't have enough in old age, the fear that somebody might have more. All of these fears have built up, and they manifest. Money is manifested in war because of the weapons. Huge amounts of money to be made out of war, not just from the weapons, but all of the knock-on effects. So essentially the universe runs what most of religions teach us. It runs on love, and yet we're living in a structure that is diametrically opposed. It's based on fear, greed, and destruction. And this is what we have to reconcile as individuals first and foremost. That if we're intent on living, shall we say, a true life in accordance with the universe, then we have to withdraw our power. And I would take issue with the idea that we have to confront this power, because actually this power draws its strength and its fuel from us. We are the fuel of this power. So the more that we are participants in this geopolitical game by cheering for this side or that side, which happens in the same way as in a football game, which is a similar, it's a replica of the global economy, is in theatrical sports and all of the rest of it. So if we really want to make a difference, we have to start with ourselves and realize that the basis of the universe is love, and we need to withdraw our power. And we do that by not paying taxes, not paying, the law. Somebody mentioned law. Law, as we've been educated, is not actually what we think it is. We think it's about justice. It's not. It's about money. It's a commercial system, which is why in Ukraine, and Israel to some extent has been culpable as well, there is child trafficking going on. Under the cover of war, made in ways that would disgust most sensible people. But that is what is happening. That is the reality. The US government is one of the biggest drug dealers in the world, as were the British in the 1850s. So this is a system that has grown up over 2,500, 3,000 years, and it's built on an ideology of destruction. Money is the foundation, the fuel, and the incentive mechanism to get people at each other's throats, whether it be on the basis of political affiliation, religious inclinations, color, creed, sex. All of these things are created to divide us. What we need to recognize that we are all connected to the creation, and therefore, whenever we harm anyone else, we are harming ourselves. If it's justified in rational terms because somebody has done something bad. Judgment is not our job. Our judgment is at a much higher level. So we are not here to judge. We are to live by universal law, which is love, God's law. And so I can fully understand, and I'm not in any way decrying or suggesting that people who are fighting for their very existence should not do so. But we need to recognize that if we truly believe that we are instances in this life and that we are part of a much bigger journey which will take us through other lives into other dimensions, whatever your beliefs may be. And I started from a very analytical, not quite as atheistic, but an agnostic position when I started this exploration. But what I find is there's a character called Werner Heisenberg, and if you've ever watched Breaking Bad, which you may or may not, it was the nom de guerre used by one of the characters. And Werner Heisenberg said, when you drink from the glass of natural sciences, at the bottom, God is waiting for you. And this is really where we're at. We're at a huge transition point, and that is why it's so violent, because for an old system to die, there will be death and destruction. But there is actually emerging through consciousness, and I see it all around me. There is a rising consciousness that we are all connected. and that these people who allegedly are acting on our interests, whichever government you're talking about, are not. They are acting in the interests of the system and themselves, because that's how they got to where they've got to be. But I see a growing realization that people need to take responsibility for themselves and within communities. Now, translating that into a theatre of war is very difficult. But we in the West can remove power from our governments. The billions they're sending in arms, the billions that they funnel through criminal countries and criminal organizations. It's a huge protection racket, government. They fill us with fear and then supposedly give us the solution. What we need to realize that by withdrawing into our own communities and further afield, I'm not talking about becoming isolated, I'm talking about communities globally. And I'm all around the globe, and I feel part of a global family, and I believe it's emerging. And there are reasons, which I won't go into, to suggest that the structure itself is moving towards one in which cooperation becomes the driving factor rather than competition. So it starts with ourselves and recognizing that whatever we're going through is a necessary transition, because what lies ahead is so different from everything we've experienced to date or has been seen within the last 2,500 years or more.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you so much for your input. Sister Arzu, what are your thoughts on what Clive and Sister Batul has explained? How do you see the, especially the different industries Sister Batul has mentioned as well, like media industry and information industry, and there are so many which are working as a soft power, but they are obviously aiding these colonial imperial powers as well in many ways. So as we were discussing earlier, that Sister Batul also mentioned some point related to ignorance and fear, these two factors as well. So how important for us to come out of it, and the way Clive also mentioned that we should not compete, but we should stand up with each other, and we should take power from it, and it should drive us together towards the truth and justice for this world, because each one of has some responsibility towards it. So what do you think, how much awareness we really need, and the role of media as well? What are your thoughts on this? What do we really need to do in that context? And what are your thoughts on the arm industry, which is obviously earning a lot out of these wars, and they are also a biggest factor fueling these atrocities?
That's a lot. I'm not sure I can cover all of it. I just wanted to reflect on something that Clive said, and I think it was actually quite important when he was talking about, you know, all the faiths, the basis of them, and the kind of philosophy of them is love. I think we forget that a lot of times, whether we're Muslim or Christian or whatever, or whether we kind of just believe in this kind of secular age of the power of the universe, or whatever we want to call it. That this is a very important facet, and I've been involved over many years in different. The terminology is conflict resolution, right? But we don't even particularly like to talk about this. It was basically around conciliation between Muslim groups in different countries, in Muslim-majority countries, and also in one country where Muslims were a minority, or minoritized, I would rather say. And this idea and it's an Islamic idea, of social being, okay, that a human being, as we understand it, is a construct of a kind of post-Enlightenment idea of what we are, okay? And actually we are not these kind of individuals in silos, all disconnected from each other. We are social beings. We exist because of each other. And this is how a kind of Islamic understanding of what insan is, of what people are, works, okay? I'm talking now, this is stuff that Imam Muhammad al-Asi has actually written about in quite a lot of detail. He's given quite a lot of lectures about his tafsir of the Quran reflects this, and his very recent translation of the Quran that's just come out, and I highly recommend it. You will find it's called the Ascendant Quran, the translation and the tafsir. Now, I think as a way of looking at the future, understanding this connectedness, and this goes beyond whether you're Muslim, whether you're whatever you are, okay? That connectedness is a way of reimagining the future that is radically and revolutionarily different to what we have had over the last 100 years, 500 years, whatever starting point you want to put to it. That said, we cannot, and I don't think, Clive, that you were saying this. I think you made it clear that you understand the position of people who are being oppressed at the level of this magnitude that we're seeing right now. But that said, I think one of the issues that we have in movements, and I'm talking particularly about, for example, the United Kingdom, where even though we are having a mass mobilization of people protesting, if not weekly, fortnightly, monthly, whatever, all up and down the country, and I think we're seeing just amazing things. I could never imagine school children going on strike, in all my school years in this country, from age 5, I was born here, so it's just unheard of in the UK. I think one of the issues we have, and one of the issues why it's been relatively easy for the state to suppress these movements, and they have been very, very belligerent in the United Kingdom, also in Germany, France, many other situations, but these three, France, UK and Germany, is that we have not actually vocally supported resistance. We have talked about the genocide, the Holocaust that is going on, and this in itself is an achievement, but we have not connected that to supporting the resistance. And I don't mean that in a cheerleading way, okay? I totally understand why there would be reticence about that, okay, for many, many reasons. But it's not wrong. It's not wrong to fight for your survival, and it's not wrong to take actions, strategic actions, which will prevent those things from happening again, and as well, liberate your communities, the communities that you are living in, and your, for want of a better phrase, nation. I don't like the idea of nation, but the situations that we are living in now. So I'm going to say specifically the liberation of Palestine and the liberation of the region from tyrannical and oppressive powers. And that reticence, or that perhaps not being on enough of a journey amongst a lot of the leadership of the movements. I'm not talking about you and me and people on this platform, or even the vast majority of people, but definitely people in the level of civil society who are kind of leading protest movements. Not saying that, not being able to articulate that, whether it's from fear or whether from not understanding it ideologically, or even being against it actually, and unfortunately there are some such characters, is what is holding back the kind of revolution that we could be having here. Okay, in these contexts, the kind of social and political change that we need. Okay, because when people are fighting in the way that they are fighting now, against US-led, US-pushed Israeli aggression, however you want to phrase it, let's forget about the disagreements we're going to have about who's the tail and who's the dog in this, okay? We have to be able to call that out, not only call it out, but say we support the end of that, and we support the people who are trying to put an end to that. Okay. Yes, of course, we do not tolerate, and we cannot tolerate war crimes, but, frankly, what we've seen in this last year, the atrocities have pretty much been on a one-sided scale. Okay. There is no comparison of anything. It's just not a conversation. So I think I think on the ground, people are thinking like that. I think we have an issue in our civil societies about how that's not being reflected. So we don't expect it from the government. We need to expect it from our community leaderships, for want of a better phrase. So that's one thing. About the media, well, ironically, just before coming on air, I was editing a volume which is called Is the Sun Setting on the Western Empire? and I forgot the second part of the title now, which is really about reimagining the future, basically. It was based on a conference that IHRC and SAC and Dean held in 2022. It was about how Islamophobia is a pillar of the kind of oppressive structures that we have today, and how it's facilitating their continued operation, but also how, by challenging Islamophobia, you are able to kind of overcome these structures as well, or partly overcome them, right? And the media is obviously a key to this, and there's no one solution. I think there is a lot of merit to be had in what Kai was saying about not engaging. Personally, I'm of that opinion, but I think as one of our contributors, who was Malia Bhatia, quite eloquently put it, we have to be working at all the different levels, okay? We need to have that, alternative media. We haven't been great at it, but we have some. We need to be able to utilize social media, even though that's a space where governments and oppressive powers are also kind of very much involved and messing with our heads. Working within the system, there is a role for it. I would not say it's a particularly important one, but, if you can utilize certain platforms, then do so, but it's not in and of itself. Personally, I don't think an effective strategy that we have to believe in all those levels. But there are ways forward. We're seeing it. But as Batul said, it's very painful. And the brunt of the pain is being paid by people of Palestine and Lebanon and in the region. And also in other parts of the world that are not getting the live streaming of their genocides and their oppression, whether that's in Kashmir, whether that's in parts of Africa, whether it's in Congo, whether it's in Nigeria, wherever it is, okay? Now, and that has been for decades, that's not just now. So, again, losing my thread of thought here. We're talking about military-industrial complex, I guess, right? Yeah. The media, certain companies, the executive, as Batul was saying, okay, these kind of key facets of the structure differ slightly. I think that they all mutually reinforce each other. And whatever ways we have to break through in that, whether it's resistance on the ground in Palestine, breaking, and the responses of the resistance, which are actually kind of making a laughing stock of the military-industrial complex, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I don't know how many videos people have seen of the missile attack of Iran on the Israeli regime. I mean, I don't know what happened to the Iron Dome. I know it is missing in action, right? All this kind of propaganda and all the money that's been spent has been kind of really called into question now, right? But ultimately, we need to be savvy, as Clive was saying, about how these things work. We have a kind of revolving door of personnel between all of these. You can just give the example of good old Michael Gove, if you're in the United Kingdom and watching this, who's been a journalist, is again a journalist, was part of, the think tank world and lobbies, and also Minister of State, okay? And there's hardly a breath between any of those jobs. They just keep going around in a circle for him. And for so many others, Boris Johnson, etc., etc. We can understand how it works, and we can also see that there are very few. So I don't even think we need a mass movement. I don't think every single person needs to be at the same level. Yes, everybody has to be on a journey because of, when we all have to be responsible of helping each other to be on a journey of understanding from a moral point of view. But the critical mass that you need is actually probably not that great to create systemic change. And I think we've seen that for the last 30, 40, 50 years in West Asia. There's been a lot of talk about how, I just want to end with this point, because I know a lot of us have been depressed about the events of the last few weeks and the last month or so, that, Hezbollah in particular has been badly affected by the attacks and by obviously the assassinations and so on and so forth. But I'm old enough to remember Hezbollah fighting with nothing, with literally nothing and very few people, and beating back this demon in a very short space of time. So I don't think we should lose hope when we know that people are fighting with right on their side, because I do believe in that. I think we shouldn't be hopeless as much as we are depressed and angry and disgusted by what we're seeing. We know that there will be justice in the end. What we have to do is work out what is our role in achieving that.
Thank you, Sister Arzu. Obviously, as you said, we should not be hopeful, and as Clive said, we should base everything on love and humanity and understanding, and creating awareness and doing whatever we can in with whatever capacity we have. Sister Batu, how would you conclude the whole discussion along with the current situation going on within Lebanon, Gaza, and between Israel, because Israel is fighting on 5 fronts as well. So how do you see this war going on? And there are troops being sent by US as well. So do you see like they will be participating in that whole situation, or they are just there to install some batteries or stuff like that, as I have seen in the media? So how would you conclude the whole discussion? We have 3 to 4 minutes. I can't hear you, sister.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So it's just a main critical point that I think it's very important to etch into our minds, and that is that the Israeli occupation entity cannot breathe without the American oxygen. It is enough for one to look at the sheer dependence of Israel on American weapons of mass destruction to understand this. Israel cannot survive a day of this war without US weapons. If we go back to what Joe Biden once said, if there was no Israel, we would have to invent one to fulfill our interests, meaning the Zionists were simply hunters for sources of power that could actualize their vision of a Jewish homeland, as it was in the turn of the century. But it was the superpower of the day, Britain, that defined that functional role for the Israeli occupation entity, and that was even for it to be in the strategic heart of Palestine. That was in the interest of the British colonial empire of the time. And then America took the helm of leadership post-World War II and became the guarantor for the entity. So it's very important that when we talk about Israel, it's not this foreign independent entity. It is the US project for the region. For Israel to win this war and to secure the defeat of all of the resistance axis, it's not just for Israel. This is Israel fighting for America. This is more important. For Israel to achieve the strategic objectives of this war is more important to America than it is to Israel itself. For that reason, America will never allow Israel to weaken at the hands of the resistance. For that reason, it sends them unconditional weapons. For that reason, it will continue to protect them, especially during conditions of war. The red line for America is for Israel to fall at the hands of the resistance. Why? Because it means that ultimately the resistance will emerge much more victorious and will fill that void. And you're talking about the finishing of American interests in the region. And we know also that Israel cannot cross what are the American red lines. Israel cannot drag America to the square that it wants. That's the biggest proof as well. We've seen it in this war. So we've seen, for example, how we know, Israel wants to drag America, right, to a regional war. The idea is that America will fight the greatest adversary and existential threat to Israel, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And in a regional war, the war becomes, a war of interests. America versus Iran, whilst the Israeli occupation entity will have the free hand to completely finish Gaza altogether, right? And the focus of the world won't be on Israel. That's Israel's strategy. But America restrained Israel from reacting in an escalatory response to Iran's Operation True Promise #1, if we remember. And we've seen Israel gain completely cold feet in these what are now 2 weeks since the last Iranian strike. That's not like Israel. Israel doesn't have a doctrine of strategic patience and taking its time and thinking about the bigger picture. Israel strikes. Israel has its bank of targets, it will hit, right? And we know that its aim is to drag America to a wider war. But this is America ultimately saying, hold on, this is a red line for us. You've got to restrain, So if America has been calling for a ceasefire for the longest period in this war, and we've not seen it happen, it's literally because the continuation of the war was to harm Israel. Because Netanyahu was keeping the Israeli occupation entity ultimately hostage, and it's not managed to achieve a single strategic military objective. But then people ask the question: then, if America wanted a ceasefire, Why did it not just impose a ceasefire? That's another question. Surely Netanyahu or surely Israel must be controlling America if that's the case. The truth is, if stopping the war was really, really a red line for America, like dragging Iran into this was, then we would have seen America actually impose a ceasefire, because it has the ability and the will and the power to do that. But the reason it didn't impose a ceasefire through an arms embargo, for example, because the moment America stops its supply of arms to Israel, that's it, right? It can no longer fight. It's because America sees it as more harmful than productive to pressure Israel at a time of war and emergency. That will effectively weaken Israel. And we said that is the biggest red line for America. So we have to understand that America is after the fulfillment of strategic objectives, and America will support Israel to the end as long as it can achieve this. This is what Israel was created to do. Israel was created as a colonial military outpost at the heart of the region in order to fulfill the functional role of the superpowers of the day. That is how we need to look at Israel. And we need to understand that politics runs on power and ability. It ultimately runs on capital and finance, as we've been talking about as well. If a project is no longer profitable, if it is failing, if it's not doing its functional role on the ground, we've seen how America itself has changed its strategies in the region. It went from being directly there in the region, this idea of a new Middle East project, this idea of the war of terror, to then withdrawing from Afghanistan, withdrawing from Iraq when it was a complete sheer and utter failure. So politics runs on power and ability. Expect policies to change with times. That's how capitalism survives. It changes its face. The dirty occupation is still there. It takes a completely different face. We know that colonialism was a thing of the past. It was a thing that post-World War II, we didn't see direct colonialism on the ground, but it shifted to keeping entities economically hostage through the IMF, through the World Bank, for example. Israel's that last colonial entity that's breathing its last days. So expect Israel is going to fall, and America itself at one point would seek to substitute the failure that Israel is for something else in the region. That's how America works. It's not a charity. Politics is not a charity.
Thank you so much, Sister Batul. Thank you so much, Clive. Thank you so much, Sister Arzu. I'm really honored to have you all on the show on this important topic. And to the viewers, I'll take a leave with the message: humanity should live, and human values should survive at all costs, because we all are human, and humanity built upon love, affection, justice, and peace. So we all should work together and fight against unjust powers. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.